Have you ever wondered what happens to the soul if death arrives in sleep? It is a question that whispers softly in the quiet hours, when the city grows still and the last lights fade from windows. We pull the blanket over ourselves like a small world of safety, close our eyes, and surrender to the night. And beyond that threshold of wakefulness begins a space we all have visited thousands of times, yet rarely tried to understand. Sleep is like a doorway into the next room, its handle always cool to the touch, its floor familiar beneath our steps. But what if one night we cross that threshold and discover there is no return? Many say that dying in sleep is the gentlest way to go. No struggle, no long hours of fear, no heavy words left unsaid. In the imagination, it looks like slipping into warm water, where everything dissolves: pain, worry, and the noise of life. But if the body falls asleep and never awakens, what happens to that part of us that never sleeps? The inner spark, the soul. Sleep itself is a border. It separates the noise of day from the silence of night, the weight of matter from the fluidity of dreams. Within it, the usual rules loosen, like a string that relaxes and begins to sound deeper. Time behaves differently there. Minutes stretch into hours, and sometimes a whole lifetime fits into a moment. The body lies still, yet inside us, memories rearrange themselves, emotions seek release, and awareness wanders through endless corridors without signs. Isn't this already like the unknown we call death? A passage where the old markers no longer work. And yet, there is one crucial difference between sleep and death. Sleep is return. We go, in order to come back. We trust the night because we know that in the morning we will open our eyes, find our slippers, put on the kettle, and meet the same people in the same routines. Death too is a door, but one that closes without a sound. No lock clicks shut, yet suddenly we realize the key is no longer needed. So the real question is not whether the departure is easy, but whether the soul is ready for a journey that no longer circles back, but stretches forward into the unknown. In this video, we will move gently, step by step, without argument and without dogma. We will listen to ancient stories, to the voices of those who have seen beyond ordinary sight. We will look at sleep as a rehearsal for the great passage, as training for the unknown. We will peer into that moment when the thread of breath ends not with a cry, but with a sigh of release. And we will ask, what awaits the soul on the far side of closed eyelids? If death comes in sleep, perhaps it comes as something familiar. For sleep is not a stranger to us. It leads us every night across hidden bridges, showing us how easy it is to fly if only we let go. And if one day that flight becomes the last on earth and the first in another world, must it be frightening? Perhaps fear begins where knowledge ends, and knowledge begins with this simple truth. In the silence of night, we are already halfway between two worlds. So let us speak calmly, not of tragedy but of meaning, not of loss but of the path, not of endings but of transitions, where sleep itself becomes the guide. For perhaps every evening it teaches us the most important skill of all, how to let go in order to awaken where we are truly awaited. Sleep has always been a mystery for humanity. From the very beginning, people have wondered what happens to them at night, when the body lies still, almost lifeless, and the spirit seems to set out on strange journeys. It is no accident that in many ancient languages, the words for sleep and death sounded alike. Among the Greeks, for example, Hypnos, the god of sleep, was the brother of Thanatos, the god of death. This symbolic kinship was no coincidence, for even then, people sensed that these two states were bound together more deeply than we imagine. Across cultures, sleep was often seen as a doorway. For some, it opened into the world of ancestors. For others, into the realms of gods or spirits. For still others, into the hidden chambers of the soul. Native American tribes believed that in dreams, a person came into contact with a force greater than themselves. The Egyptians taught that at night, the soul would rise and journey through other realms, returning to the body each morning. And in the old Norse traditions, there was a belief that sleep could claim a person forever if the spirit failed to find its way back. And indeed, sleep is strikingly similar to a small death. We lie down, close our eyes, and leave this world behind. The weight of the body vanishes, breath slips beyond our control, thoughts dissolve. First, there is only darkness, and then new images, new rules, new landscapes. In this space we may meet those long departed, walk through cities that never existed, or live whole lifetimes that vanish with the dawn. Is this not reminiscent of the soul's journeys described by mystics when they speak of life after death? The practice of lucid dreaming makes this connection even clearer. Many who have learned to navigate their dreams report sensations of being separate from their bodies. Some have seen themselves from above, others felt they rose from their beds, while others traveled through radiant corridors of light. Such experiences are often described as an out-of-body state, as if the soul were granted a temporary release from the limits of flesh. For some, this may be nothing more than imagination. For others, it is living proof that our essence can exist apart from the body. If sleep is a small death, then death in sleep is simply a continuation of this natural process. Only this time, there may be no return. Yet the very nature of sleep seems to prepare us for that moment. Every night we practice letting go, releasing control, loosening our grip on familiar reality, and trusting ourselves to something greater. In this sense, sleep becomes a rehearsal for the final transition. Perhaps this is why so many spiritual traditions teach that the way we live, and even the way we sleep, shapes the way we will die. A peaceful sleep, born of a clear conscience, was once seen as a sign of a bright and gentle passage. Troubled, restless dreams, on the other hand, were viewed as reflections of unresolved knots within the soul. Thus, sleep quietly becomes a mirror, showing not only the fatigue of the body, but also the journey of the spirit seeking its path onward. And when death arrives in sleep, it simply follows a route already known. A person passes through the same familiar gates, only this time they open wider, leading to a place with no return. But is that truly frightening if the road is already familiar? For every night when we close our eyes, we take the very first step in that same direction. Imagine this. A person goes to bed just like any other night. Nothing feels unusual, no strange premonitions. They close their eyes and sink into familiar darkness. For those around them, everything appears calm and ordinary. The breathing slows, the body relaxes, and then, at some quiet moment, the soul takes one step further than it usually does. The difference between ordinary sleep and death in sleep is delicate, almost invisible. Normally, when we dream, the thread binding soul to body remains strong. It is like a fine ray of light holding us here. But when death comes, that thread begins to loosen, unraveling like fabric worn by time. And one night, as the soul moves along its familiar dream corridors, it realizes that the way back has quietly closed. What is striking is that those who have had near-death or similar experiences often describe the absence of pain. No struggle, no panic, no fear. The transition in sleep is gentle because consciousness is already accustomed to the nightly act of letting go, slipping into the unknown. Death in sleep, then, feels not like a fall or a sudden blow, but like the continuation of a natural movement. A person drifts deeper, and instead of awakening in their body, they awaken into another world. Subjectively, it may feel like a dream that has become too vivid to ignore. Sometimes it is like a radiant light spreading beyond the darkness. Sometimes it is the sensation of slipping free of the body, leaving it behind like a garment no longer needed. Sometimes it feels like meeting someone who has been waiting all along. But what all of these descriptions share is peace, serenity, and an extraordinary lightness. Unlike death during wakefulness, where the mind may cling, resist, and suffer, in sleep these attachments are already weakened. Consciousness has been practicing release all along, surrendering control, trusting the flow of images, and so the final moment of departure comes almost unnoticed, like stepping onto one last stair, only to find the staircase has ended beneath your feet. One might say that death in sleep is the quietest transition possible. There is no harsh boundary between dreaming and what follows, for one flows into the other, like evening into night. And perhaps this is the hidden grace of such a passing. The soul does not feel rupture, only continuation, moving forward without body, without limits, into the greater reality where true awakening awaits. Death in sleep is a theme long wrapped in mystery, yet at times we can glimpse it through the testimonies of those who have experienced clinical death. Though their bodies were revived, their souls had already begun a journey along the path that usually leads farther on. Many of these stories share one common detail: they happened at night. A person drifted into sleep and suddenly found themselves in a state that could not be called an ordinary dream. They felt themselves leaving their body, seeing it from above, noticing the smallest details of the room, the position of their hands, the clock on the wall, even the movements of loved ones nearby. These impressions were far too vivid to be dismissed as dreams. One man recalled falling asleep only to feel himself being lifted upward. At one point, he saw his body lying below, yet felt no fear, only profound calm and a quiet certainty that everything was as it should be. Another described his sleep turning into a long corridor of light, where at the end, he was welcomed by relatives long gone. In that moment, he understood he had died. But when doctors restarted his heart, the light vanished, and he found himself back in his body. There are countless such stories. Some speak of meeting beings of light. Others recall a love so vast it defies description. Some describe the sensation of soaring freely. Almost none speak of pain or terror. On the contrary, many confess that returning to the body was harder than remaining in that luminous state. What is striking is how often the symbols repeat themselves. Light, like a warm radiance that both calls and soothes. The corridor as a threshold between worlds. Encounters with the departed, as if to confirm the soul does not walk alone. Even among people of different cultures and beliefs, these images appear again and again, as though they had all touched the same hidden reality. These accounts give us a powerful hint. Death in sleep may indeed feel like a continuation of dreaming, but a dream in which boundaries dissolve and what was hidden is finally revealed. Perhaps this is why so many who experienced clinical death at night say they lost their fear of dying. They discovered that it is not an ending, but a meeting with something greater, brighter, and profoundly welcoming. And if death in sleep carries the soul away forever, then these final sensations are what remain: peace, light, and the feeling of coming home. And could there be a gentler path for the soul than that? Throughout history, people have sought to understand what it means to die in sleep. Different spiritual traditions gave this experience a special interpretation. For some, it was seen as a sign of grace; for others, a sacred moment of union with the divine. In Christianity, sleep has long been a symbol of death. It is no coincidence that we still use the phrase, "to sleep forever." In the Orthodox tradition, even the word for repose is directly connected with the image of sleep. To die in sleep was regarded as a quiet, peaceful departure, one granted by God to those who had lived with faith and purity. The lives of saints even tell of holy men and women who passed away in this way. They lay down to rest and simply did not rise again, their faces glowing with serenity. For the believer, such a death was a blessing, for the soul left the body in peace, not in fear. In Buddhism and Hinduism, sleep is seen as preparation for death. These traditions teach that each night, consciousness separates from the body and enters subtle states, similar to the intermediate existence the soul experiences after leaving the physical world. The Tibetan Book of the Dead even states directly, "What we pass through in dreams is very much like the stages the soul encounters after death." This is why practices like lucid dreaming and meditative awareness before sleep were considered training in dying well, meeting the transition calmly, clearly, without attachment. To die in sleep, then, was to cross over naturally, without resistance. Among the Sufis, the mystics of Islam, sleep was understood as a meeting with the real. They would say, "People are asleep, and when they die, they awaken." For them, death in sleep symbolized entering eternity without pain or shock. It was believed that in such a moment, the person was already attuned to inner stillness, and so the heart could more easily step into the presence of God. Even in folk traditions, death in sleep carried a special meaning. The elderly would often say of someone who passed quietly at night, "He left without struggle, without suffering." To the living, it was both a comfort and a mark of respect for the departed. Such a death was seen as proper, as if life itself had allowed the journey to end softly and with dignity. Across these religions and teachings, one truth emerges. Sleep and death are deeply intertwined. Sleep is not merely rest for the body, but a doorway toward the eternal. And so death in sleep is not seen as an accident, but as a natural transition, one for which the soul has already been gently prepared. When death comes in sleep, the soul seems to awaken, not in the familiar world, but in another reality. In that moment, a person does not feel an ending, but rather a continuation of the journey. Many spiritual traditions teach that awakening after death is much like awakening from sleep, only clearer, deeper, and more real. The first thing often described by those who have had near-death experiences is an encounter with guides. These may appear as angels, radiant beings, spiritual figures, or even loved ones who have already passed on. Their purpose is to ensure the soul does not feel lost in this new space, to explain what has happened and to accompany it in the first steps beyond. Rarely is the soul left alone. It is greeted so that the passage is not frightening. Then begins the entry into a special realm. Some describe it as a corridor of light, others as a vast field without boundaries, where time no longer exists. It feels like dreaming, but far more vivid and unmistakably real. In that place, perception sharpens. Joy, relief, and freedom are felt more intensely than they ever could be in the body. If in dreams, we often blur the line between illusion and reality, after death, the soul feels the opposite. At last, everything is unmistakably true. Many mystics claim that at this stage, the soul remembers much more than it knew during life. Visions of past lives unfold. Forgotten promises and lessons resurface. It is like reading through a book, turning the pages of one's journey and realizing that every event carried meaning, every decision led to a destined outcome. The difference between an unexpected death in sleep and a conscious departure lies only in readiness. A person who lived in peace with themselves, with gratitude, will feel the transition as natural and effortless. For a soul weighed down by fears, regrets, or inner knots, it may take longer to release. Yet even then, death in sleep offers a special blessing. It comes gently, without shock, allowing the soul to reach balance more swiftly. One might say that death in sleep is an awakening into a place without pain or struggle. The soul simply opens its eyes in a new reality and understands. The world has not ended. It has only changed. And if for the living this seems like the closing of a story, for the departed it is the beginning of a new path, one toward which they have been moving all along. Many people admit that if they could choose the way to leave this world, they would prefer to go in their sleep. There is something deeply human in this wish. Sleep has always been associated with rest, with the gentle transition from the tension of the day into the quiet of night. And so death in sleep feels like the natural extension of that same silence. On one level, it brings psychological comfort. A person does not feel struggle, does not witness their own fading, does not endure the fear of final moments. They simply close their eyes and sink a little deeper into sleep than usual. For loved ones, such a passing is also easier to accept, for there was no suffering, no torment, only the peaceful expression on the sleeper's face. But there is also a spiritual meaning. Many mystics believe that death in sleep comes when the soul is ready to depart without fear. In the state of sleep, earthly concerns have already been set aside. The heart is calm, the mind does not resist. In such a moment, death approaches gently, lifting the soul in a state of peace. And so it is often said, to die in sleep is to leave in harmony, without inner struggle. In dreams, we already stand closer to the unseen world. We are on the threshold between body and spirit, between the temporal and the eternal. Perhaps this is why death in sleep is regarded as a special gift, not tearing the soul away, but carefully guiding it toward where it has long been destined to go. When we hear that someone passed in this way, quietly in sleep, it awakens both respect and consolation within us. We think, if there is a way to leave this world, perhaps this is the most luminous. For in that case, the last sensation a person knew was peace, not pain. And deep within, we all understand. The fear of death is not about death itself, but about the image of struggle, suffering, and sudden loss. Death in sleep dissolves that fear, turning the passage into something natural. And maybe that is why so many secretly hope. If that day should come, let it be like a night where you simply closed your eyes, only to open them again in another world. Death in sleep is not a fearful mystery, but a gentle way of leaving, without pain, without struggle. It is a transition, like softly gliding from one state into another, where the body rests while the soul awakens in a new reality. We have seen that sleep and death are deeply connected. Every night, sleep teaches us to let go of control, to trust the unseen, to step into a realm where different laws apply. Perhaps this is why death in sleep feels like a natural, familiar path. The soul does not vanish into darkness. It moves toward the light, toward guides, toward those who came before us. Different traditions describe it in different ways, yet they agree on one truth. Death in sleep is a blessing. Christians speak of it as peaceful repose. Buddhists and Hindus see it as a smooth transition, prepared by the very nature of dreaming. Mystics call it an awakening into truth. All these voices join into one. In sleep, the soul departs more gently than at any other time. It is important to remember that it is not the moment of death itself, but the life we live, that shapes the passage. A clear conscience, inner harmony, and gratitude for our days make the transition light, with sleep becoming a gateway to the radiant beyond. The most valuable thing we can do is live with awareness, to practice letting go, forgiving, being at peace with ourselves and others. Then the soul will not fear sleep, for sleep will no longer be darkness, but a doorway to new awakening. The final message is simple. Death in sleep is not an ending. It is an awakening into another world, where life continues in a new form. Just as each morning we open our eyes after the night, so too will the soul one day open its eyes in a place beyond fear and pain. Death in sleep is, in truth, a return home, and perhaps that is why it is considered the most luminous path a human being can walk.